So you're bringing it, the start of the year. You know you got nothing but cheer. Your family and your friends, they are so proud of you. It's time to start to do those things. The goals you set, the ones you call your dreams. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. You're born who you are. You change what you have to. You're born who you are. You can change if you have to. You're born who you are. You must change 'cause you want to. It's time to focus on your dreams. Put them off so long, they're there but can't be seen. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. Let's step up our game a bit and use those things we quit and laugh and smile and say we're lucky to be alive. It's time to start to do those things. The goals you set, the ones you call your dreams. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. So you're bringing it, the start of the year. You know you got nothing but cheer. Your family and your friends, they are so proud of you. It's time to start to do those things. The goals you set, the ones you call your dreams. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. You're born who you are. You change what you have to. You're born who you are. You can change if you have to. You're born who you are. You must change 'cause you want to. It's time to focus on your dreams. Put them off so long, they're there but can't be seen. But how hard do you try? You're lucky to be alive. Let's step up our game a bit and use those things we quit and laugh and smile.
Good morning. Welcome to Lyceum here at Cassadaga. So happy for you to join us. I'm the Reverend Gregory P. Kent, Lyceum Director, at least for today. We're going to continue talking about historical figures, and our teacher today is Osman Ratcliff. Jamie.
Thank you. Good morning. I can tell you that I'm certainly in my element today. I love history. I help with the historical tours around here, and I'm always digging. I'm always doing that. So We're going to talk today about the 1909 season in Camp Cassadaga, as they called it back then. We're very fortunate that in the DeLand News, which was a publication that was published between 1909 and 1921, that the season of 1909 was reported on every week of that season. So we're very fortunate to have that. This is what the newspaper front kind of looked like. And this is the lady that wrote the editorials, Carrie E.S. Twig. I did pass a hand out that has some bios on the people that I'm going to be mentioning, what I could find. But Carrie Edna Skinner Twig, it was Twing or Twig. She was born in Sherman, New York in 1844. She was an author. She wrote several publications, and she was also a member of Lilydale she was part of the New York State Association of Spiritualists and Patrons of Husbandry. Throughout her lifetime, she frequently spoke at the Chautauqua Institution's Grange Day. Carrie also became a teacher for the Cassadaga New York Spiritualist Assembly. At that time, Lilydale was known as the Cassadaga Lake Free, and then changed their name to the City of Lights and then to the Lilydale Assembly. She was a historian of the Cassadaga Lake Free Association, which changed its name, which I just said. Carrie passed away in her home in August 25th of 1910. So the season after this, not sure if she attended the 1910 season, but she did pass away shortly after. Again, very fortunate to have these. If you don't have the handout, Gio's going to pass them out. If you're online, there should be a link to be able to download these via Google Drive. So I'm going to get started. So the first week that was reported on was Friday, January 22nd of 1909. And she states, "The past week has been a busy one at the camp. The sound of the saw and hammer is part of the amusement of the place, for it tells its story of growth and improvement. Mr. H.A. Buddington and his wife of Springfield, Massachusetts," and I believe I have a picture of Mr. Buddington. There he is right there. "Mr. Buddington has long published books and periodicals under the name of Star Publishing Company, Springfield, Massachusetts. Mr. and Mrs. Miller of Big Run, Pennsylvania are located with Mr. and Mrs. Frank Johnson outside their gates. They are to build winter homes here. Many of the solid men of the North have an eye for this locality, especially when they try to climb it for the winter. Dr. Badcock and wife entertained Mr. McGarvery, Miss Palmer, Mrs. Twing of Cassadaga, and Mrs. Arthur Pelton and Mrs. Adams, and Mr. and Mrs. E. W. Bond of Lake Helen on Tuesday. Particular interest centers upon our Friday afternoons at the bazaar on account of the character readings given by our gypsy, with her cup with the signs of the zodiac upon it, and our gifted palmist Miss Bowman. They are much sought after, and meanwhile the sale of aprons, handkerchiefs, beads, and many fancy articles is going on. Our Lady of the Rose Garden is also secretary of the Ladies' Auxiliary and has charge of the bazaar. The many friends of Mr. and Mrs. Baker of Kansas City, Missouri are greatly shocked to hear of the recent passing away of Mrs. Baker. They were expected at the Hotel Webster again this winter. Mary Marsh Baker was a fluent writer, a ready speaker. One of her books, Ruby Dana, is a most charming book, and her poems were stories of the soul. She was a woman whose interest in all reforms was marked for her sense of justice, and her characters were many. All will extend their sympathies to Mr. Baker, who stands alone now in one sense, but never alone in the true sense. Mrs. Baker has two sisters, Mrs. Cornstalk and Mrs. Hughes, who are both here. At 2:00 this morning, Mrs. Cornstalk awakened Mrs. Hughes and said, 'Sister Mary is dead.' I saw the notice in the Kansas City paper. So they were both looking for the telegram, which was later delivered. Was it a dream? Miss Addie Hoggenboom of Westfield, New York, is spending the winter with Miss Thatcher and daughter. She is an expert in shampooing and manicuring and is doing satisfactory work. On account of illness, J.H. Young, our veteran speaker, was unable to appear on Sunday afternoon. All hope his indisposition will be transient. He fought for his country in days that tried men's souls. He has been standing for freedom of thought and expression for long years. He has always realized the moral value of any movement of reformatory character and is determined by the life force of community or nature which it finds action, and so he has helped to register on the dial of evolution that which has been moral impulse to those who is known by his work or pen. Our home choir, Mrs. Harris as pianist, consists of Mrs. Pratt, Mr. Ballard, Earl Slater, and Dr. Critchley. They sing from our hymnals sweet songs that touch the soul, and the audience joins in. Earl Cart Kelsey offered the invocation, and President Hilligoss asked Mr. Hubbard to be the first speaker. He spoke in an eager manner. The progress of our planetary way in the morning. This was in response to the address of Reverend Mr. Blocker at the Baptist Church that morning in Lake Helen, and was optimistic as to the outcome of religious thought now viewed from different angles of vision. Dr. Gould also, an old Vermont worker, made an address full of the courage of his convictions and failed to the fruition of our work. He linked the earthly and heavenly until one could hardly separate the two. It is said, they best hear the angel sings who listens to earth sighs. Dr. Gould, as well as Mr. Hubbard, is deeply interested in a camp at Queen City Park, Vermont. Mr. E.R. Hopkins of Brooklyn was the next speaker. He reviewed the progress of spiritualism and in a way contrasted the past and the present. The major always acts the military man. The writer then was called forward and made a short address. President Hilligoss, speaking of the persistency of righteousness, cited an incident that for 9 years has occurred and is still occurring in the Cincinnati's large courthouse. A little woman dressed in black with a luminous face and pleading eyes will daily go from room to room at the great structure and asks lawyers and judges and whoever she may meet that seem to belong there, "Will my case come on today?" And they will tell her, "No, no, not today." And they do tire of her, for they know her story well, how at the sudden death of her husband and home they were paying and praying for was gotten away for her. Her troubles disturbed her mind on the one thing until she became mind insane, but is always hoping for the redemption of her home. The rest of that week was kind of not legible for me to read, and it wasn't very much. So going back on this, the way that Carrie wrote is, to me, is so great because it's like a letter home. And there is some humor and, some interesting things on the topics that they spoke of. But the season at this time only ran from January to March. So it wasn't a very long season. Most of the members came from Lilydale or from other camps that are mentioned here. So there was something I was going to mention on that. It'll come back to me. But I'm going to go on to the next week. The next week is really neat, as it had a birthday party. January 29th, 1909, the camp is well supplied with groceries and things pertaining to most villages. I remember what I wanted to mention. The Hotel Webster. It is mentioned in there that people stayed at the Hotel Webster. The Hotel Webster was a hotel that was built behind the Ann Stevens house, which is off of Kicklater. I'm not sure when it was torn down or what had happened to it, but this is a picture of a group from 1903 standing on the steps of the Hotel Webster. All that property back there was more clear to where you could see the lake at the time. So it was kind of lakefront property, which is kind of neat. But what I'm trying to go to here is the picture of the general store, and I apologize that these are out of order. So this hangs in our office, and I can only guess that this is the inside of our general store at the time. So the camp is well supplied with groceries and things pertaining to most villages. Mrs. Bach is doing well in her store, and she and her mother are winning many friends. Mr. Pelton makes daily visits to take orders, as does John McGill of the supply store. All seem to be doing a fair business for this time and this season, and as usual, the numbers are not here yet. Mrs. Hazard of Vermont, who is staying in the apartment house, has been suffering with nervous exhaustion, the result of her long journey, but under the care of Dr. Zanders and the careful nursing of her daughter, we trust she will soon be better. Under sunny skies, we're all writing letters to the snowbound north. We wish we could send them blossoms and warmth too. The event of the week has been the reception of Dr. G. N. Hilligoss on Saturday last evening. It was gotten up by his wife and so planned that everybody seemed happy. No special invitations were sent out, just the word, if they cared to come and give him greeting upon his 70th birthday. Bushnell's orchestra was secured. Lemonade and fancy cakes and crackers were served in the informal way. Mrs. Clark and Mrs. Thompson, assisted by others, passed out refreshments through the slide, and old and young were happy. It is not often that anyone else's birthday makes so many happy as did Dr. Hilligoss's. It is estimated that over 250 people enjoy the evening in our commodious hall. Some of the friends unknown to even Mrs. Hilligoss asked the people who desired to give something toward a birthday present to the doctor. It was not a hard task. For people brought or sent it, some who did not chance to be solicited. It was found that there was a surplus left for something else after the beautiful gold-headed and ebony cane had been purchased, so they invested in a good rocker. Willing hands decorated the platform with Old Glory, large pots of ferns, and a profusion of roses until it looked like a bower of beauty. President Hilligoss and his wife had been invited by Mr. Slater to take a ride in a gasoline launch, and so the work could be done without his knowing it. I did try to research what a gasoline launch is. The only thing I can come up with is rockets. I hope that wasn't it. I'm guessing it was like a Model T or something along that line. The affair was under the management of the Ladies' Auxiliary. I do have a picture of the Ladies' Auxiliary. Again, I apologize. This is out of order. Let me go back. Ladies' Auxiliary. The affair was under the management of Ladies' Auxiliary. The president was chosen master of ceremonies. While the people were gathering at the hall, a number of people accompanied the choir, who serenaded the company couple at their home, and were led by Dr. Critchley paying his cornet period to the hall, where himself and wife were ushered to the platform. Mrs. Twing introduced Mr. Hubbard as the first speaker, who congratulated the doctor upon the occasion and spoke in an earnest way of the cause represented. Mr. Skills was called upon and responded in a pleasant manner. Vice President Bond arrived a little later and was surprised, as well as the doctor and his wife, for he had been chosen to make the presentation speech, which he had did in a pleasant manner. He did not wish to imply that the doctor would need a cane because of his age, but wished him to accept it as a reminder of the esteem to which he was held by the residents and non-residents, and the chair, he said, meant rest. Mrs. Alice M. Spencer, a member of the official board and corresponding secretary of the camp, has always said that she could not talk in public, but if ever there was a condensation of thought in words that just meant the truth in any speech. That speech was made by Mrs. J. Spencer Clegg-Wright, who spoke in her usual giving out thoughts that were pertinent to the occasion. Mrs. Armstrong gave out her thoughts in rhymes that was a word picture of the past period. She gave it in a very forceful way and presented him some rosins in memory of his arisen ones. Mrs. Twing was the last speaker, and before she had finished, Mrs. Hilligoss presented to her for the Ladies' Auxiliary a picture of the doctor, to which she responded, thanking her for the kind thoughts which prompted the act, and declared that it would be treasured by the ladies because of the unfailing kindness he had always manifested towards them as workers. Early in the program, Mrs. C.T. Pratt of Malden, Massachusetts, read a most beautiful original poem written for the occasion, which will now be enjoyed by our readers, and take away in a measure the sadness which comes from the sort of growing old. They say we're growing old, and why not, let me ask you? Life is a joy, a happiness, a song. Years may not count if in the spirit true of having comradeship we pass along. Yes, we are growing old as the years go by, telling the story of the things we do. We laugh, we sing and dance and pray and cry, then rise again as they're passed from our view. Old, we are growing old. The years seem shorter as they pass away, and we shall all grow young as growing older. We learn to see a better day. But if we're growing old, those yearly milestones have shown but briefly what we do. The lost and found in life's long journey, the treasures that we gather as we go. And so with larger, clearer vision, since time must pass, we better see, life means not age nor youth. Each year a prophecy of what will be. Tonight we meet our brother on the journey to pass with him the milestone of the year. Let's wave the banner bright of loving greeting, of mirth and jollity and birthday cheer. And brother, when alt shalt meet out yonder, in that dear home not very far from here, no milestones then will mark our passage onward. All days will be bright days of birthday cheer. C.P. Pratt. Our photographer has taken a large picture of the platform as decorated for the reception with Dr. Hilligoss and wife upon it. It was nearly 12 o'clock when the party broke up, and all voted it was a great success. It's kind of fun.
Talk about the platform. Is it in here or was it?
The platform, yeah, a couple of notations on that. When they were talking about the hall, they were talking about in here. The partitions weren't here at the time. This was all an open area, and they held a lot of dances, a lot of parties in here. The platform was in what was called the pavilion. And that, again, you're going to see, was this. This is where the temple stood, or this stood where the temple stood, rather. It was octagon shaped, as you can see. It was noted to seat 500 people in there, and it had a platform and a pine straw floor inside of it. What I found out the other day is before it was built in with wooden walls, it had tent-like walls, and it stated that it could seat 1,000. Not sure how they got from 500 to 1,000, but it was very interesting. So this was torn down when it became very dilapidated, and they built the temple in 1923. So this is what they're talking about when they're talking about the pavilion, that it was presented inside of there. So February 5th, and I'm going to apologize because this is very small print and I didn't get a chance to write it out. One of the pleasant events of the last few days has been the visit of Mrs. Mary Hardenberg, one of the earliest cottage owners here, and now a resident of Lilydale, New York. Mrs. Hardenberg's many friends were delighted to meet her. She is with Mrs. Pratt. Mrs. Hardenberg has been the guest of honor in several dinners and tea parties during her stay. J. Clegg Wright's classes are held every morning at 10:30 at the pavilion. Usual interest is taken in them this season, and there is a promise of still larger classes. Mrs. A. Averill of Lynn, Massachusetts is to spend the season with the writer. She is largely identified with the camp and society work in the East and has largely made the organization of which she has been secretary for many years such a standard of excellence to be envied by the less fortunate. The Sunday afternoon meeting was enjoyed by a large number of people. Mrs. J.D. Bartholomew was speaker. Her theme was wisdom and love. The messages given were thankfully received by those fortunate enough to get them. Some of the optimistic ones think the cold spell is just what was needed. It is acting like a tonic, they declare, or a tonic, they declare. Late arrivals at Cassadaga are Mr. and Mrs. George Leahy, R.W. Savage and Son. There's a whole list that I'm not going to read. Mrs. Belle Boykin, who has been a guest at the Pines for the past 3 months, has returned to her home in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm not sure what the Pines was. Do you know? I haven't found any information on what the Pines. I'm assuming it's another hotel. Mr. and Mrs. Charles A. Swank, who have been stopping at the Pines, have left town on a tour of inspection before returning to their home in Buffalo, New York. At the Hotel Webster. The celebration at Hotel Webster of Thomas Paine's birthday on the evening of January 29th was pronounced a pleasant affair by those present. The program consisted of Sun Liberty by Henry C. Vancott, I Murmur Not by Sherman, violin by Mrs. Joseph Jeffries, piano by Mrs. Van Heusen, anniversary address, Professor Clegg Wright. Let's see, I'm not going to name a bunch of names. Professor Johns and wife are stopping at the Webster. Mrs. Johns has been identified with our entertainments for several years and is very helpful in many ways. We miss the bright young granddaughter who has accompanied them on their former trips. Colonel Van Horn and his wife of Kansas City arrived at Saturday at the Webster. The colonel fought for his country and is willing to use his tongue and pen for human justice. He was for years editor of the Kansas City paper and is still wielding his pen when occasion requires. His wife has kept step with him for many years and has identified with all his victories and has helped him bear his sorrows. I do have a picture of Van Horn also. I can go back. There he is. Is that it? Yep, there he is. There's Van Horn. Short week. Not a lot going on that week. So we move on to February 12th. In writing a little testimony of Colonel Van Horn of Kansas City last week, your correspondent neglected to state that he was an honored member of our National Congress for a number of years. New faces are seen every turn, and rooms in the cottages are being filled, but there is still room for more guests at the Cassadaga Hotel in Brigham Hall, and the 3 cottages for rent upon the house. So I do have a photograph. The original hotel that stood where the Cassadaga Hotel as we know it is, was actually a 3-story wooden structure. This is a picture of a group that was on the steps of that hotel. What I find very interesting is this right here, Transmedia, and they had little advertisements up here, optician, things of that nature. That burned down in 1926 on Christmas night, but it was ran by Emma J. Huff for a short time. I'm not sure what her tenure was there. She was from Lilydale, and she ran the hotel. Along with that hotel, it took our general store and the post office when it burned. Visitors from nearby places have been daily attracted here. The Rose Garden is already getting over the effects of the late cool reception given it, and it gives promise of bursting buds in their future. Visitors from nearby places have been daily attracted here. The Rose Garden is already, I already read that, okay. Preparations for opening day have been very active under the direction of Mrs. Maynard Bond of Lake Helen, who is with the aid of Mrs. Alger, Mrs. Bach, Earl Slater, and President Hilligoss, who seldom allows himself to be left out of anything that means work for the camp. Having decorated the platform and the auditorium very tastefully, the flags of all nations have a fair showing with Old Glory as the leader. Potted plants and vines, a large vase presented to the society here, has a beautiful vine trailing down its side. The large picture in the center of a county scene with such soft tints as sky and landscape as to rest the eyes is something to make one think of home and country scenes, which at the sight of it. James D. Palmer, one who worked with a will, with hands unused to such labor, to help bring about the building up of this camp. His purse was also opened when occasion required. At the left of the picture, Frank E. Bond, also promoted to a fairer country, who in financial straits tided the veterans of the camp over the rough places. He was true to its interest to the last. Though immersed in business and perhaps not as much in touch with the spiritualistic belief as some less busy ones, he so honored his father's and mother's religion that he kept in touch with the needs of this place and helped to bridge over the rough places. Above the picture is a fine picture of President Hilligoss presented to the Ladies' Aid by his wife. It is like a sentinel keeping guard. The whole effect is charming. I want to go back to the Bonds. Frank E. Bond was the son of Earl Bond. They owned the lumber mill in Lake Helen. I have a picture of that too. Sorry, I forget what direction it is. This was an advertisement in the 1909 paper from their lumber mill, and they also had a brick company. This is a picture of their lumber mill that was in Lake Helen. They were very instrumental in the building of the houses here. They supplied a lot of the lumber, the brick for the Snipes house, which is the really large house across from the temple, and I believe the bricks for the temple. They supplied that also. There was notation later on that they also supplied the bricks for people to make walkways to their house. The house that Eber built is Ed Conklin's, if you know who Ed Conklin is. It has on the plaque, it's on Stevens Street. It's the house right before you get to the temple on the what would be the east side of the road. It's the oldest surviving residential house here in camp. Its name on it is Sancta Sophia, which is after his wife. And as we were talking, they didn't live in there long because it's rumored that she was very jealous of the female medium. So she made him move to Lake Helen. And in the 1900 census, it does state that they are living in Lake Helen, and he's an orange grove farmer. So I'm not sure. I'm guessing that he retired and he gave the business over to his son, Frank. Frank went on to become a well-known DeLand politician and built the Bond Mansion, which I do not believe is surviving. In Lake Helen. So they were very instrumental in the building of this camp. The morning session was a symposium, and several took part in the exercises. The first song was My Country 'Tis of Thee. The choir consists of John Ballard of Vermont, Lita Mrs. Ballard, pianist, Mrs. C.P. Pratt of Massachusetts, Dr. Critchley of New Hampshire, Miss Van Horn of Ohio, Earl Slater, and Mrs. Frank Johnson of Lake Helen. Prayer was offered by Mrs. Clark Kelsey of Rochester, New York. Dr. Hilligoss then welcomed the friends to the 15th annual meeting of the Southern Cassadaga. In most touching words, he referred to our arisen workers and emphasized the needs of union in our work. His words are full of hope for the future and appreciation of past victories. He then called upon E.W. Bond, vice president, who has served as president for many years. Mr. Bond spoke of the past and the present and of that which the association represents. J. Clegg Wright ended his short tribute with "Do Not Forget Your Dead." W. Lee, one of the officers of Lake Pleasant, Massachusetts Association, declined to make a speech, but said, "I am not a speech maker, I am a worker." B. Rhodes, president of Central New York Association, was introduced, but he, like Mr. Lee, was just a worker. Mrs. J.D. Bartholomew pronounced the benediction. The evening session at the pavilion was largely attended. Our people are an untiring people. When mental food is to be dealt out, the speaker was Reverend Oscar A. Edgerly of Lynn, Massachusetts, who has a national reputation as an exponent of our gospel. Mr. Edgerly has visited us in the past and was visited us in warmly welcomed. His subject, modern heresies and their application to present development. That would be interesting. Showed that the ruling intelligence was optimistic and sure that there was a meaning for good in all. Spiritualism and New Thought, mental science, Christian, and the philosophy. The conclusion to be drawn from the argument of the speaker would indicate that we are to look for the conservation of the good as found in all sects and all creeds fearlessly, eliminating non-essential and commending for universe use the principles of eternal truth as revealed in nature. The song by the choir, "Father, Father, Pilot Me," seemed a fitting harmony for the close of a full day's service, emphasized by a benediction by Mrs. Morrell. Frank Johnson is just now enclosing a fine, large house for G.W. Miller of Big Run, PA. He has been here 2 seasons previous to this and has become charmed with the climate and is much interested in the camp. He and his wife had made many good friends here. Mr. Johnson is also about to erect a house for John Ballard of Vermont, who came last winter for the first time. Mrs. Ballard had improved enough health for them to desire a southern home. This is written by Mrs. Mary Bazell. This is the blessed trinity of lake camp life that Camp Cassadaga has to offer. A shimmering gem enshrined in green, reflecting in its misty sheen the roses of the morning skies and sunset's iridescent dyes. Palmettos fringe in double row, its sandy shores above below. Ancient pine in stately line pencil the sky with dark design. And here the western shore rolls high, it pine-clad knolls to meet the sky. Vine-clad villas cluster there with restful and inviting air. Roses bow in sweetest praise of sunny skies and balmy days. Friendliness and pleasant cheer meet all folk who gather here. High thought and happy life unite to lend the camp a true delight. Here all retain the heart of youth, the inner joy of sacred youth. The outdoor life and sunny air, glad simple living free of care, that fills each fair fresh morning blast, and breathes its beauty with a zest, with just enough of work and play, of books and friends to fill each day, of talks and walks beneath blue skies, all this the path where reason lies, a path in helpful kindness trod, that leads through nature on to God. So she wrote that about camp. So how are we on time? Are we bored yet? So this is February 19th. I'm going to skip over some of the names. The first week of regular camp season was full of interest. On Monday at 2:30 was a conference was held in the pavilion at a large number of visiting speakers and mediums. Monday evening, the regular weekly party was held and thoroughly enjoyed by a large number present, more tables being in play than any previous party. The regular Wednesday afternoon meeting was in charge of the writer and largely attended. Wednesday evening was celebrated as Grand Army Day, and a large number gathered in the auditorium to listen to stories and reminiscence of the old soldiers, veterans of both the Northern and Southern Army, being invited to participate. They're referencing the Civil War, I would imagine. Musical selections were rendered by local talent. Thursday at 2:30, Mr. Oscar A. Edgerly was the speaker. His subject was the conservation of good. His address was masterly, setting forth the power of spiritualism to preserve, defend, and keep the safe truths that have come to us from all ages. In the evening, the regular weekly dance was held in the pavilion. These weekly parties are proving a very important feature of our camp work, being enjoyed by the elder members of our community as well as the younger. A trio of colored minstrels contributed to the pleasure of the occasion by rendering selections between dances. On Friday afternoon, the ladies received at the pavilion and served light refreshments Mrs. C.P. Pratt, who for weeks has been gypsy on Friday afternoons, reading from her cup for quite a number. All who have readings with her speak in the highest terms of what they receive. Her readings have been gratuitous for the benefit of the ladies' aid, as has been Mrs. Bowman's of Massachusetts. On Friday, however, we had added to the usual mediums Mrs. Critchley of New Hampshire, a very excellent medium, Mrs. Russell of Michigan, who is doing good work, and Mrs. Jackson of Boston, Massachusetts, whose work was praised by those who had a chance to get a reading. People from many states were introduced, and it was a very enjoyable afternoon. Friday evening, the Lincoln Centenary was celebrated in the pavilion. Mrs. C.P. Pratt read the celebrated speech of Mr. Lincoln at Gettysburg, after which Professor Wright delivered a memorial address, speaking in most laudatory terms of the great service rendered to our nation by the Arlson statement, Abraham Lincoln. Appropriate musical selections were rendered by local talent. The service during the week were all largely attended. Sunday the 14th was a largely interesting day, and many visitors were present from surrounding towns. The association officers have been very busy in improving the camp. Notably among these improvements are the brick sidewalks, which are such a boom to our citizens. The association is under obligations to the Bond Brick Company for the gift of the bricks, and hands quite unused for labors for years have worked hard to bring about this result. The campers and visitors are indebted to the Brick Company and to all who have assisted in the work. The cottage owners are many of them improving their places by building brick walks from the sidewalk to their doors. Arrivals at the Cassadaga are B.F. Du Bois of Wife of Philadelphia, Mrs. E.B. Garrett, and so many other names. The editor does chime in on this. Dear sir, I feel that it is a justice to your reporter at our camp, who is one of our most eminent speakers. A report of her work ought to be embodied with the report submitted. Accordingly, I take the liberty of sending the following. Saturday afternoon, February 14th, Mrs. Carrie E.S. Twig was the speaker at Camp Cassadaga. She delivered one of her inimitable, soul-inspiring lectures, replete with spiritual food and helpfulness for the sorrow dwellers of this earth. All the earth's people would do well to take her advice and ever be true to the heavenly vision. So that's February 19th. So on February 26th, she states, almost everywhere one turns, we find evidence of kind thoughtfulness. Our platform needed a new rug, and Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Slater placed a fine Axminster there as a gift. I'm going to stop for just a second there. Mr. Joseph Slater was the son of Earl Slater, and he was the husband of Julia Slater, to which the Slater house is named after. And is my understanding Julia lived to 107? Is that correct?
I thought it was 103.
Okay, 103 to 107, depending on the dates that you find. So she had a long, happy life. But if you're familiar with the Slater house, which is also our library up on Chauncey, that's to whom they're referring to as Julia's husband in this. Mrs. Cooper of Philadelphia, after a short stay, placed a bill in the hands of the president to help along. Some who have never felt the attention, the different functions for which admission is charged, have handed sums of money to the president of the Ladies' Auxiliary as a gift to the work. There are people who belong to other churches who aid in our entertainments and show a kindly interest around. On Tuesday, February 16th, Mr. Oscar A. Edgerly was the speaker. The subject was the spirit world, the instigator of the present progress of humanity. The lecture was a comprehensive and instructive argument in support of the supposition that the leaders of humanity in all walks of life are guided and inspired by heavenly intelligence, who are in reality the administrators of divine providence. Quite a number of friends who were invited to spend the evening with Dr. and Mrs. Hilligoss on Tuesday evening. It was the 7th anniversary of their marriage. I believe Dr. Hilligoss was married 3 times, even though it was his 70th birthday a couple weeks prior, so that's probably why it's the 7th anniversary. Wednesday evening, there was the usual entertainment, the chairman of the entertainment committee being too ill to perfect the arrangements for that evening. Mr. Julius Johns, one of our reliable helpers, summoned to his aid several friends and placed some fine numbers upon the program, notably the book agent. Mrs. D.A. Morrell was the speaker on Thursday afternoon. Her discourse was comprehensive view of the general philosophy of occultism, replete with the practical lessons for her listeners. On Thursday evening, the annual masquerade dance took place in the beautiful and commodious camp pavilion. There were over 200 people in attendance. Costumes were exceptionally good, most of them being original and unique, and would have done justice to a far more pretentious occasion. Guests were present from DeLand, Lake Helen, and Orange City. Directly after the conference on Friday, the Ladies' Auxiliary served a New England supper in the pavilion, which was partaken of and highly enjoyed by over 100 people. At the conclusion of the lecture, many most accurate messages were given by Mrs. Clark Kelsey, which were eminently satisfactory to her hearers. Frederick Shields and Mrs. Hannah Still surprised their many friends by returning short from a visit of New Smyrna as husband and wife. Congratulations are in order. A telegram informs us that Dr. H. Brigham of Fitchburg, Massachusetts, passed away on the 20th. Dr. Brigham was at one time president of our camp. He was always kind and considerate in rendering pecuniary aid when needed. His many friends feel to congratulate him on his release at the ripe age of 89 and extend sympathy to all who mourn his loss. Dr. Hubbard Brigham and Sarah Brigham built Brigham Hall, which is the white building to the south of the hotel. It was noted that they both attended the Eclectic Medical College of Ohio. I had been very scared to look up what that meant, and I believe it's in the papers. It's basically the eclectic, it means botanical methods. Dr. Hubbard was an allopath, according to the medical documents that I found, which meant that he based his science on modern uses of medicine, and it states that in there. So not as scary as it sounded to me. So that was February 26th. So I'm not reading the entire thing. This is kind of funny. This is not the DeLand. This came out of the Daytona newspaper about the same time. I find this quite humorous. So, Dr. F.H. and Mrs. Houghton went over to Cassadaga Camp, Lake Helen, Saturday, and stayed till Monday, and were charmed with the entertainment, the restful scene, and the many comforts. Cassadaga is now in full swing with the faithful representatives of the cult from every section of the North. The Spiritualist camp is composed of largely old whiteheads who meet annually and have the time of their lives. Mrs. Brigham has the distinction of having built the first cottage at the camp, and she has at a camp at Lake Pleasant, New Hampshire, and at another camp. Mrs. Brigham is up in the 80s, yet very active, sprightly, and adequate. She said to the Daytona visitors, "When you come to my cottage, open the door and come right in. Don't stand and knock the paint off my door." Such free and open-handed hospitality characterizes the camp, and Dr. and Mrs. Houghton are going back again. No seance has yet been announced for the Peck Block. This was during the 1909 season. The lady that they're talking about in here, Mrs. Brigham, is the wife of the doctor that had passed away the week before. She was in attendance here. I'm not sure why she wasn't with her husband, but she sadly passed away the following year. So she had the time of her life. One more time. So March 12th. Well-attended and interesting conference was held on Monday afternoon, which several visitors made brief remarks. Monday evening, the euchre party, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, was held in the pavilion. Mrs. C.A. Pratt was the medium for the regular Wednesday afternoon seance and gave a large number of satisfactory psychometric readings. The minstrel show on Wednesday evening attracted a fine audience and added a goodly sum to our treasury. An entirely interesting program was presented at all parts, being taken by young ladies and gentlemen identified with the work and success of the camp. The stage presented a fine appearance when the curtain arose to disclose about 20 colored artists, each of which whom performed his part in an artistic manner. The cakewalk by two little brothers and the presentation of bouquets by very small miss being especially worthy of mention. A touch of realism was added to the performance by the entrance at the rear door of the hall of a Baxham-colored woman who persisted in forcing her way through the audience and onto the stage to collect $1 due her from one of the end men for washing. The whole affair reflected great credit on the manager-leader, Mr. Earl Slater, as well as upon all who assisted in making it such a great success. Thursday afternoon, Mrs. J. Clegg Wright was the speaker and as usual gave an address that held the closest attention of hearers. The regular Thursday evening dance took the form of an apron and necktie party and was attended by a large number who greatly enjoyed the novelty of searching for a partner wearing an apron to match their particular necktie. Friday afternoon, there was a conference in the auditorium and the regular reception by the ladies of the auxiliary, the gypsy being present, as usual, to give readings to those dearest to them. The services on Sunday were well attended. At 10:30, the writer officiated, the subject of the address being, "It is His Angel." The powerful and instructive address given by Mr. Wright that evening was in line with classwork. The many friends of Mr. Joseph Slater, one of the trustees of the association, were pained to hear that he was quite severely injured in a railway accident near Columbus, Ohio, but glad to hear that he is recovering from the effects. So that's that one. I'm just going to read very quickly because I know I have a couple. I didn't get through them all, but I'm going to read the last week, just a part of it. The last week of the camp has been extremely busy. One in the interest has kept up until the last. At the election of officers for the Ladies Auxiliary, Mrs. Twing, who has been president for 11 years, at last requested that a new president should be named. We have, let's see, there is one more sonnet appreciation with a plea. O Florida fair, land of palm and pine, sea-washed, sun-kissed arrayed in green and gold, so young a land in seeming, yet so old. The forest lands festooned with moss and vine, for centuries were wet with bloody wine. The battleground of race they past years hold, so much that it stirs the heart, breathing deeds untold. Now present peace and future powers are thine. Forgot not that the brave blood's been shed for thee. Protect thy children from such strife and pain. May industry increase to the sea and sea, but save thy pines from death and greed of gain. Thou'st rich in beauty of sea and earth and sky, but Florida, let not thy forests die. And that was the end. It was noted that we had 239 members of the camp at the time that attended, that were in attendance. We also note that 116 non-members showed interest in the camp. So we had well over 400 people that attended here that season. So that's it. That's it. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. So if you do want copies of these, you can go on, ask me for the website and I'll give you the website because you can print these out publicly. So thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. We appreciate that. That concludes our Lyceum. That concludes our historical figures for the month. We hope you stay for our 10:30 service. Thank you for joining us virtually. Thank you for those who are physically here. And that's the end of our Lyceum. Thank you.